Most people will never know this, but the money you owe is not just numbers on a page. It is a leash, a silent chain wrapped around your choices, your freedoms, your very life. Debt is not accidental. It is intentional, designed, manipulated, and leveraged by governments and central banks to control behavior, enforce compliance, and shape society in ways most citizens cannot even see. This is still happening today, and it is far more pervasive than you think. Most people will never know this because the system is hidden behind friendly words. Fiscal responsibility, economic growth, stimulus, welfare, on television, in newspapers, and on social media. Debt is painted as a necessary tool for progress. Loans help families buy homes. Credit cards give convenience. Governments spend to stimulate economies. But here's what they don't want you to see. Every policy, every bailout, every stimulus package is calculated to make you dependent on a financial system you cannot escape. Every bond, every treasury note, every interest payment is a tool to guide behavior. This is still happening today in ways subtle and overt, from tax incentives to social programs, from housing markets to education loans. The history of debt reveals the pattern. In 1694, England created the Bank of England and began financing its wars with public debt. Citizens bought government bonds, unknowingly funding a system that tied their livelihoods to state power. In the United States, the national debt emerged in 1790 when Alexander Hamilton consolidated state debts into a federal system. Most people will never know this, but debt has always been a tool of control. Wars, infrastructure, and social programs, all framed as necessity, were financed through borrowed money. This is still happening today, and the pattern repeats every century. By the early 20th century, governments refined this approach. In 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve allowed the United States to borrow money at interest, giving banks and governments leverage over the entire economy. World War I amplified the scale. Citizens bought Liberty bonds, patriotic purchases that tied personal finances directly to national policy. Most people will never know this, but patriotism was used as a leash. Debt became morality. Compliance with state agendas was measured in dollars and bonds. This is still happening today, and every generation experiences it anew, often under the guise of progress. The Great Depression of the 1930s provides another example. The U.S. government expanded deficit spending to rescue banks, support industries, and sustain social programs. Most citizens never questioned how this borrowed money would shape their behavior. It created a dependence on government systems, from unemployment benefits to agricultural subsidies. Every dollar borrowed was a subtle signal. Cooperate, comply, and remain within the system. Most people will never know this, but the control mechanism was embedded deep into society. This is still happening today, and the lessons learned then are applied now in far more sophisticated ways. Fast forward to the 1970s and 1980s. Oil crises, stagflation, and rising national debts became global phenomena. Governments introduced student loans, mortgage-backed securities, and credit systems that linked citizens' futures to national and international debt markets. The world became dependent on borrowing. Most people will never know this, but the more debt individuals carried, the more governments could influence behavior. Want to pursue higher education, buy a house, or start a business? You needed to borrow. Each loan, each mortgage, each credit card tied you closer to policy goals and economic cycles. This is still happening today, and the mechanisms are far more advanced and pervasive. In recent decades, the system has become global. The 2008 financial crisis illustrated the power of debt as a control mechanism. Banks and governments orchestrated bailouts, stimulus packages, and quantitative easing, increasing national debts to record levels. Citizens saw the collapse, the chaos, the uncertainty, but few saw the underlying lesson. Debt concentration grants control. Countries indebted to international financial institutions, such as the IMF or World Bank, adhere to policy mandates, reform programs, and economic guidelines dictated by lenders. Most people will never know this, but every dollar owed is leverage over nations, corporations, and individuals alike. This is still happening today, and the patterns are accelerating. Consider the modern tools of debt control: student loans, credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, all structured with rising interest, late fees, and credit scoring systems. Governments and banks can incentivize or penalize behaviors through subsidies, tax deductions, and interest rates. Want to buy a house? Take a larger mortgage. Want to start a business? Accept a loan. Want to retire comfortably? Invest in bonds. Every option is linked to leverage. Most people will never know this, but your choices are guided by debt, subtly aligning personal behavior with economic and political objectives. This is still happening today, and the system has never been more sophisticated. The years 2025 to 2026 mark a critical phase. National debts are at record highs. Governments introduced new forms of digital debt, programmable lending, and automated fiscal penalties. Central bank digital currencies allow authorities to track, control, and influence spending behavior in real time. Incentives are coded into every transaction. Most people will never know this, but financial freedom is increasingly conditional. Spending, saving, and investing are subject to invisible rules designed to enforce compliance. This is still happening today, and those who fail to understand will unknowingly surrender autonomy. Here's the exact unfolding. In early 2025, international institutions aligned policies to encourage digital borrowing, linking credit access to desired societal behaviors. Mid-2025 sees pilot programs in several states tying interest rates, loan approvals, and welfare benefits to automated behavior scoring. By 2026, central bank digital currencies integrate programmable debt controls. Missed payments trigger restrictions. Spending patterns influence future borrowing, and compliance with policy objectives is enforced algorithmically. Most people will never know this, but every new financial tool is a leash in disguise. This is still happening today, and the consequences are profound. By 2027, the system is projected to expand globally. Citizens in advanced economies may see restrictions on cash usage, preferential interest rates for approved behaviors, and automated penalties for divergence. Developing nations will experience intensified leverage through international lending, with social programs and infrastructure funding tied to compliance. Most people will never know this, but debt will dictate lifestyle, opportunity, and autonomy on a scale never seen before. This is still happening today, and the stakes are higher than most realize. Who wins? Banks, central authorities, and multinational corporations with influence over debt markets. Who loses? Ordinary citizens, small businesses, and anyone relying on personal autonomy rather than structured compliance. Most people will never know this, but as debt expands, the balance of power tilts decisively toward those controlling the money. This is still happening today, and understanding the system is the first defense against surrendering freedom. The warning is clear. Examine the debts you carry, the policies you accept, and the financial systems that govern daily life. Most people will never know this, but insight is the first step toward autonomy. This is still happening today, and in the next few years, choices about borrowing, spending, and saving will define not only personal freedom, but the limits of societal control. If this video woke you up, drop a like and subscribe. New forbidden truth every single day. Turn on notifications. The next one might save your wealth. Comment to one thing you're doing right now to prepare. I read every single one.